This is a classic example of the carrot and the stick. From the time these tariffs were announced, the first thing that I'd said was, it's all stick. It was all downside for everyone. He's going to tariff everyone and he's going to tell everyone to move back, but there was no clear commitments to these companies, to Apple, to TSMC, to NVIDIA, what the benefit was going to be for them to make these massive investments. So what we're hearing now is President Trump and the administration is starting to give some clarity. One, the downside is still there. If these companies decide to continue manufacturing all of their critical components and all the rest of their manufacturing overseas, they will pay significant tariffs. However, if they're willing to make these large investments to onshore, to bring more manufacturing back to the U.S., which is what the administration set out to do, now he's giving a very significant benefit. So you heard no tariffs whatsoever to companies like NVIDIA, like Apple, like TSMC and Samsung. So this is, I think, the right move based on the goals of the administration. We can argue whether we should be doing tariffs or whether we should continue to push so much onshoring, whether we can be competitive. But by taking the tariffs off, it is going to be competitive versus the alternative.
Now we're looking at some of the chip makers, and I want to bring up the board of the Taiwan chip makers because TSMC, we're seeing this very hard rally, but what's going on with UMC? This, of course, is a smaller player. I believe that they do have a partnership with Intel to be manufacturing in the United States. How come they're not, riding along with this big rally that we're seeing?
Yeah, Emily, right now, the big companies are the clear winners. They're the ones that are able to make these large commitments. You heard Tim Cook in the Oval Office making $600 billion commitments. We've heard Jensen Huang making significant onshoring commitments. We've heard TSMC making $200 or $300 billion in commitments to build additional fabs in the United States. These smaller companies, not just in Taiwan, but everywhere, the ones that do not have the same scale and leverage, these are the ones that it's going to be more unclear. They don't have the ability to win over the president with hundreds of billions of dollars of CapEx spend. They're going to have to negotiate. And just like we did with tariffs, or we're trying to do with tariffs around the world, I think we're trying to strike the biggest deals first. So Apple, NVIDIA, TSMC, these are the biggest chip makers with the largest volume that have the most dollars to pledge. These are the big wins that President Trump wants to get. But as you go down into smaller chip makers, you've got companies like Marvell here in the U.S. You've got companies like AMD, which is a it's very large, but comparatively to NVIDIA, not very large. And then you've got, like you mentioned, UMC. You've got other fabs and foundries and manufacturers that are now in a situation that they're going to have to negotiate. UMC may have to make a commitment or scale a commitment. And by the way, Emily, Intel is still in a bit of uncertainty. We've had the Senator Cotton's note that came out today looking for some more information about Lip-Bhutan. And then, of course, you have whether or not Intel is going to benefit from this, whether we care about Intel being the manufacturer of chips in the U.S. or just that they are manufactured in the U.S. by TSMC or others.
Now, I'm just catching this headline here, and this isn't a market that we normally associate with semiconductors, but the Philippines semiconductor industry president is saying that the U.S. plan to impose 100% tariff is devastating as 70% of the Philippines' exports is semiconductors. What do you know about Philippines as a semiconductor manufacturing base?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of details on this yet. Manufacturing assembly, a lot of assembly is done across parts of Asia outside of Taiwan and outside of Korea. That includes Philippines and Vietnam and other parts. So they're probably part of that final assembly and shipment. And until there's more clarity as to how, the final assembly, how President Trump was sort of trying to stop Tim Cook from obfuscating the supply chain by pushing more through India to get to the U.S. It was really, in the end, all about getting it to the U.S. So right now, if things go to another part of Asia and then ship to the U.S., there just isn't enough clarity yet on exactly what that will mean. But I think that's going to be an important concern with some of these nations that we've either already made agreements with that now are going to be asking what this means for them. And of course, for the larger companies that use these different parts of the region for assembly and packaging, by the way.
This announcement on the Right. This announcement on the 100% on semiconductors came through in the Oval Office when President Trump was accompanied by Apple and making their big investment announcement, $100 billion. Now, this is already in addition to the $500 billion pledged earlier this year in February. Now, Apple's promises, is that an open check?
That's going to be a really interesting one to watch because in the past, these commitments have been made. But you heard President Trump say if these commitments are made and they are not followed through, they're basically going to be accumulating the dollars, the tariff dollars, like back taxes. So if, shovel-ready projects don't begin, if the ground doesn't break, if we don't start to see progress, as the administration doesn't start to see progress, there is a chance that they could pull back on these exemptions. Having said that, I have a feeling that based on the math that companies like Apple and Nvidia have been very careful and very cautious to, do the calculus here to figure out what would be the best situation, what would be the best outcome. And of course, it is great for the United States to have more manufacturing here. You can put aside the tariffs, you can put aside some of the actual components that people may object to with the Trump administration and the plan. But the supply chain resiliency, what the CHIPS Act set out to do to actually bring more manufacturing of semiconductors, especially at the leading edge, back to the United States, this is going to happen because TSMC is going to build there, because Samsung's going to build there, because these companies like Apple and Nvidia are going to commit. Of course, this will put some pressure on Intel. Companies like Micron will continue to develop memory there. The big question I still have, though, that isn't really solved is U.S. intellectual property, because these are companies based in Taiwan and based in Korea, bringing their manufacturing over, but we still don't have IP if something, say, between China and Taiwan was to escalate.
Now that we have this new tariff, 100% on semiconductors, Apple, of course, with its manufacturing pledges building out in the United States. This puts the supply chain at a crossroads, also putting into focus the U.S.-China tech race. What can you extrapolate from where we are right now?
Well, when it comes to the race, everybody understands what's at stake. We saw the president roll out his plan in D.C. just a few weeks ago. It's all about deregulation. It's all about creating expediency and urgency. It's about training and upskilling. It's about onshoring. So he's doing what he said he would do. And if everyone out there really wants to understand one common goal that we should have, whether it's in Taiwan, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in the West here especially, is we want to lead this race. The economic impact of winning in AI is going to be multiple decades of economic leadership. So we still need relationships with China, and we've seen some progress made with those AMD chips and those NVIDIA chips that are now getting licenses and going to be able to likely ship over this next quarter or two. But we've also seen, the exchange. We need those rare earth magnets. We need things from China. And of course, we want access to their market and they want access to ours. But the race is on, and this is going to continue. And I think there are going to be elements of protectionism. There's going to be elements of open innovation. But we are clearly, under this administration, going to do what it takes to lead. And I think it is the right thing, because we do need to lead in AI if we want to maintain our status as the world's leader in the economy.
And what does this mean, if anything, for Huawei and SMIC? Do they stand as a long-term threat to U.S. dominance?
Absolutely. I always say that it's a big mistake to underestimate the resolve of China. We've seen it make great progress with its cloud matrix technology, with the Huawei Ascend chip, but we've also seen that there's still consternation and there's still a desire to work with NVIDIA among the ranks, among the researchers. This is why the 3-year-old H20 deprecated chips from NVIDIA are still in such high demand. But we expect China to be working on all fronts, to be negotiating, using leverage. At times that may be negotiations through, investigations of U.S. companies, that may be in terms of limiting some of the access that U.S. companies have to their markets. And of course, these games, I call them these microaggressions, are going to go back and forth. But in the end, it's a better place in the world if we continue to diffuse the best technology, if these two nations continue to push one another to innovate and do so in the spirit of building better lives and better humanity. So of course, all the defense stuff, that can get a little, bit negative. But overall, I think the race is good. I think it's good for the world, and it's great to see companies like NVIDIA and then Huawei continue to push each other and continue to push on the value that AI can bring to the world.